Okay, let's talk about two types of manipulation when we're talking about moving a robot. You've got kinematic and inverse kinematic. Kinematic is dealing with the joint movement, like what the joints are doing and having to move those. Inverse kinematics is a little bit more complicated and you're moving a point. So let's say what's in the gripper of the robot, we want to move that point in a certain direction, and then we don't really care about what the joint's doing. So I came up with a cute little way of saying it. So kinematics is joint movement, no respect for point. Inverse kinematics is point movement, no respect for joint. Now, it's a little bit of a oversimplification of the two terms. What kinematics really is a study of bodies and angles. Okay, so my arm, like I can express certain things about where my arm is, what my arm's doing through kinematics. Inverse kinematics is point movement, no respect for joint. And what that means is, let's say that I pick up my Diet Mountain Dew. Okay. Now, what I'm doing right now is inverse kinematics. Okay. So you're doing inverse kinematics all the time. Your brain is calculating what it will take for those joints in your body to do a desired outcome. So if I want to pick this up, unless I'm just a raging lunatic, let's say that it's a cup and it's full to the brim, I don't necessarily want to turn it sideways. So if I use nothing but my elbow, now it might work for a drink because I'm going up and I'm actually tilting that. But what if I wanted to pick up something that I didn't want to drink? Whenever I pick it up like this, I'm going to go with this hand real quick because you'll be able to see the angles a little bit better. So what inverse kinematics is I care about what the point in space is doing. So I don't care what my arm has to do to pick this up so that's, perpendicular to the ground. So I want it to go straight up. I don't care what my joints are doing to make that happen. So inverse kinematics is caring about, let's say, this point in space, and if I move it around, the joints will go with it. So imagine that you're pulling a point in space all around, and the joints just go where they are. So we don't care what the robot has to do as far as joints are concerned. We just care about picking up that piece straight up. Okay? So inverse kinematics is what we do naturally all the time. Like our brain is doing calculations to say, I need this to go straight up. What does my wrist need to do? What does my elbow need to do? What does my shoulder need to do? It's doing all those things, and we're not really consciously thinking about it. We're thinking, I need to pick this straight up. But it's a bunch of joints working in tandem because let's say kinematics, which is we care about the joints, we don't really care about the point. That's how we used to have to program robots. We would go and tell the shoulder what to do, and then we'd go and tell the elbow what to do. We'd go and tell the wrist what to do. Okay? So, old school way, before computers got really expensive and powerful so that we could do some of these calculations ourselves, like our brain's really, really smarter than we give it credit for. Not me, because I'm conceited, but it's doing things that we don't even realize. Okay, so when I go and pick this up, my brain is going, what's the most efficient way for me to get that straight up and down? I'm not thinking that I need to bend my elbow. Now, if I bend my elbow, but I don't compensate by bending my wrist, I change the orientation of that. if I want it to go straight up and down, I'm going to have to bend my wrist to counteract the angle that my elbow is going. We're doing that automatically. Well, old school robots, and you will do joint manipulation in here because you will do joint manipulation out in the real world. You would go, I need the elbow to go up. So you would program that joint to move. And they're like, okay, well, I don't like this orientation. So now I have to move my wrist joint to compensate for the angle that I changed here. Okay? So it was a lot harder and more convoluted to move things with the robot. So it did take, a lot of people a lot of time to program a robot to do things. So if I just wanted to pick this up, I had to do it by joint. So, manipulating that robot, I would move the elbow joint and then I'd move the wrist joint. And if I wanted it to go parallel to the ground, like right now, I moved it was over here, but if all I did was move my elbow and my wrist, now I'm offset, right? So now I have to move my shoulder to get it there. So now, with joint movement, there's no way of getting around that you will have to use some joint movement sometimes. Okay? That's why it's still an option in the robot, and that's why, in some of the labs you're still using joint coordinates, because with kinematics, with joint movement, we care about the angles. Now, if we get all kinked up like this and we try to use kinematics where we want to go straight down, well, the robot might be in the way of itself. So then we're going to have to use joint manipulation to move the robot out of the way so we can continue in the direction that we want to go. The vast majority of programming that you will do most of your points in inverse kinematics. We care about the point. And now instead of looking at it like, okay, I'm going to use the L joint. So I move the L joint and move this. All I have to care about is where do I want this to go? I want it to go straight up. In our robots, straight up is X plus, right? So we put it into Cartesian coordinates, which gives us a three-dimensional, imagine a cube. And we can tell that end of the arm where we want it to go, and it will just pull the joint. You could think of it as pulling the joints in that direction. Now, how many ways can I get this point how many ways can I get the Mountain Dew to this point in space? If you answered infinite, you're way smarter than the thought, okay? Because this is just a point in space. I don't care what the joints have to do. I could keep that right there, and then I have my body even more contorted. I could scoot back and, pretty much have straight joints all the way. There's an infinite number of angles that will get me to that point. So we still have to use joint coordinates if we need the robot to be in a certain orientation when we get there. Okay? So those are the two main things I want you to know. I want you to know those two big terms, kinematics, inverse kinematics. Kinematics is, I'm going to measure this angle at my shoulder, measure this angle at my elbow, measure this angle at my wrist, and then that's going to tell me where that point is. So I don't know where the point is, but I can use math to figure out with the length of the, my forearm and my upper arm, where that point is in space. When I start moving those angles, I'm not really caring what the point does. Okay, so when you're in joint coordinates, that point's going to move. Like if I move, my elbow joint, that point's going to move. We have no respect for it. Okay? When we're in Cartesian, when we're in the inverse kinematics, what that does is that's a harder calculation to do. Kinematics you can do with geometry, right? You can figure out where that point is in three-dimensional space. If I give you an angle, a length, another angle and a length, another angle and a length, you know where that point is with simple geometry. Inverse kinematics is saying, I care about this point. Find me a way of getting those joints into a position that will get me that point there. Okay? So I'm trying to get everything 10 minutes or less. I am at 11 minutes. Like, forgive me because I'm still working on it. If it's under 15 minutes, I think it's a lot better than 2 hours. All right, so this is types of manipulation. Have a good day.